My husband cheated on me with my sister, and now they want to be together. I found out in the worst possible way by walking in on them in our bedroom.
My sister, barely covered by the sheets, had the audacity to look embarrassed, while my husband stammered excuses that didn't even make sense.
I felt my stomach drop, my hands shaking as I processed the betrayal. This wasn't just some random woman, it was my own sister, the person I trusted the most after my husband.
The confrontation was ugly. My sister, Olivia, at first tried to apologize, but then she changed her tune.
"We didn't mean for this to happen," she said, holding my husband's hand as if they were the victims. "But we're in love." My husband, no. Ex-husband to be, just stood there, silent, his guilt written all over his face. My world shattered in that moment. Years of marriage, trust, and memories dissolved into nothing.
I had never felt so betrayed, so alone. I left that night, unable to bear another second in that house.
Staying in a hotel, I replayed every moment in my head, trying to understand how I had missed the signs. Olivia was younger, beautiful, carefree, but she was my sister. We were supposed to have each other's backs.
Instead, she had been stabbing mine for who knows how long.
The pain was unbearable, but anger soon took its place.
They had made their choice now. It was time for me to make mine.
The next morning, I sent my husband a text telling him I wanted a divorce. No discussion, no second chances.
He didn't even try to fight it. He just replied, "I understand." Olivia, on the other hand, called me in tears, begging me to talk.
I agreed, not out of kindness, but because I wanted to hear her justify destroying our family.
When we met, she looked remorseful, but not enough.
"I love him," she whispered.
"I never planned this, but I can't ignore my feelings." I stared at her, disgusted.
"You didn't just take my husband, Olivia. You took my trust, my family. Do you really think love justifies that?" She cried, swore she never wanted to hurt me. But the damage was done. I realized then I didn't need an apology.
I needed to move on.
The best revenge would be living well, proving that I didn't need either of them in my life.
So that's exactly what I set out to do. The divorce was finalized within months.
I cut ties with Olivia completely. Our parents tried to mediate, but I refused. I wouldn't pretend to forgive just to keep the peace. My life was mine to rebuild, and I wouldn't let their betrayal define me. I threw myself into work, traveled, met new people. Slowly, the pain dulled, replaced by something stronger: self-respect.
Then, a year later, I got a call.
Olivia was sobbing on the other end.
He cheated on me, she admitted.
"I should listen to you." I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness. She had destroyed our bond for a man who betrayed her just as easily.
But it wasn't my problem anymore. "That's your mess to deal with," I said, and hung up.
I had already learned my lesson.
Some betrayals cut too deep to forgive. Some relationships aren't worth saving. And most importantly, I had learned my own worth.
I walked away from that chapter of my life stronger, wiser, and ready for whatever came next.
My mother cheated on my father with his best friend, and now I don't know what to do.
I found out by accident, overhearing a conversation I was never meant to hear.
My father had confronted her, his voice shaking with anger and betrayal. How long? He had demanded, and my mother's silence was answer enough. My stomach twisted. The man he was talking about, Greg, had been in my life since I was a kid.
I never thought he could be capable of something like this. The house turned into a battlefield overnight.
My father was heartbroken, but there was no room for tears, just anger, quiet and sharp. My mother, on the other hand, kept making excuses. It just happened, she insisted, as if years of lying and sneaking around could be an accident. My father refused to listen. The next day, he told me he was filing for divorce. The weight of those words settled heavily on me. My family, as I knew it, was over. I wanted to be on my dad's side. I felt his pain, his humiliation. But my mother wouldn't let me go that easily. She sat me down, her eyes pleading.
"You don't understand, sweetheart," she whispered.
I never meant to hurt anyone. But how could I believe that?
She had hurt my father more than anyone ever had.
And now she wanted me to comfort her.
I felt trapped, torn between the two people who had raised me, forced to pick a side when I never asked to be part of this war. Greg tried to talk to me once. I saw him outside our house, waiting for my MOM.
He looked guilty, but not enough.
"Listen, kid, I never wanted to hurt your dad," he started, but I cut him off. "Then why did you?"
He had no answer, just silence. I walked away, my blood boiling. This man had been my father's closest friend.
Someone he trusted.
And he had destroyed the trust without a second thought. My father moved out a week later, leaving behind a house that felt emptier than ever.
I stayed with my mom, but only because I had no choice.
Every time I looked at her, I saw the wreckage she had caused.
She acted like things could go back to normal, like she and I could still be close.
But I wasn't a little kid anymore.
I couldn't pretend nothing had happened.
The more she tried to pull me close, the further I wanted to run.
Then came the day I had to choose where to live. My mother begged me to stay, promising things would be different, that she still loved me.
My dad, on the other hand, simply said, "It's your choice." No pressure, but that made it even harder.
How could I choose between them?
One had betrayed our family. The other was drowning in pain. No matter what I did, someone would get hurt. I hated them for putting me in this position. In the end, I went with my father, not because I forgave him for leaving, but because he was the one who had been wronged. My mother cried, told me I was breaking her heart.
But she had already broken mine.
I needed time, space, and most of all, I needed to be away from the mess she had made.
Maybe one day I'd be able to forgive her.
But that day wasn't today. Even now, I don't know if I made the right choice.
The pain lingers. The questions remain. Why did she do it?
Did she ever think about what it would do to me?
I may never get the answers.
All I know is that I had to save myself from the wreckage, and maybe, just maybe, that was enough.
I suspect that my husband is not the biological father of our child.
It started as a small doubt, a passing thought I quickly pushed away.
But as our son grew, the differences became undeniable.
His features didn't match either of ours, his eyes, his hair, even the shape of his face. Friends joked about recessive genes, but something inside me whispered a darker truth.
A memory I had buried deep, one I never wanted to face, began clawing its way back to the surface.
Years ago, before I was married, I went to a party.
It was supposed to be just a fun night out, but I drank too much, and things became blurry.
I remember waking up in a strange room, my dress slightly off my shoulder, a headache splitting my skull. I told myself nothing had happened, that I was just drunk and confused.
I shoved it down, never told anyone, convinced it was a bad dream.
But now, staring at my son, that night felt more real than ever. My heart pounded as I considered the possibilities. What if I was wrong? What if I was overthinking everything? But what if I wasn't?
If that night was what I feared, then my son's very existence was built on something I never consented to.
The thought made me sick. But what terrified me more was the idea of telling my husband.
He loved our son with all his heart. Could I really destroy that with my suspicions? I tried to ignore it, to pretend everything was fine. But doubt doesn't just go away.
It gnaws at you, whispers in your ear when you least expect it. One night, I sat by my son's bed, watching him sleep, and made a decision. I needed answers.
I ordered a DNA test in secret, my hands shaking as I sealed the envelope. The results would change everything, one way or another.
But I had to know the truth, even if it shattered my world.
Days passed like a blur.
I jumped every time the phone rang, checked my email obsessively. When the results finally arrived, I hesitated. My stomach twisted as I opened them. My worst fears confirmed there was zero probability that my husband was the father.
The room spun. My breath came in shallow gasps.
My child, the one we had raised together, was a product of something I had spent years trying to forget. And now I had a choice to make. Telling my husband meant risking everything: our marriage, our family, his love for our son.
But lying meant carrying this secret forever, living with the guilt, the deception. I sat with the results for hours, tracing the words with my fingers, tears falling onto the paper. My husband deserved the truth.
But would he ever look at our son the same way again?
Could I live with myself if he walked away?
Now, I wait.
I wait to see if he'll come back, if he'll still see our son as his. I wait to see if I'll ever forgive myself for not realizing the truth sooner.
But no matter what happens, one thing is certain: secrets always find their way to the surface.
And once they do, there's no turning back. My brother cheated on his wife with my best friend, and now I'm in the center of a scandal.
I wish I could say I found out in a subtle way,
but no, my best friend, Lisa, confessed it to me herself.
"It just happened," she said, her voice shaky, as if that made it better.
I stared at her in disbelief.
My brother, Ethan, had been married to Sarah for years.
They had kids, a home, a life together.
And now, I was supposed to do what? Pretend this never happened?
I confronted Ethan the same night, hoping he would at least deny it, give me some reason to believe Lisa was lying. But he didn't.
He just sighed, rubbing his face.
I messed up, he admitted, like he had just forgotten an anniversary.
But it's over now. That was supposed to make it better. Like it being over erased the betrayal.
I wanted to punch him, shake some sense into him. How could he do this to Sarah?
To his own family. Now, I was trapped. Sarah was my sister-in-law, but she was also my friend. She had trusted Ethan, built a life with him, and he had thrown it away. And Lisa, my best friend, had been a part of it.
I felt sick. If I told Sarah, I'd break her heart.
But if I kept quiet, I'd be complicit in the lie. I wanted no part of this mess, but there was no way to escape it. No matter what I did, someone would get hurt.
Lisa begged me not to say anything. It's done, she insisted. Telling Sarah won't change anything except destroy her. I hated that she had a point. But wasn't she already destroyed? She just didn't know it yet.
Ethan, of course, wanted me to stay quiet too. It's my marriage, he said coldly. Stay out of it, as if his actions hadn't already dragged me into the middle of it.
As if I could just turn a blind eye and live with myself.
Days passed, and the guilt ate at me. Every time I saw Sarah, every time she smiled and talked about Ethan like he was the perfect husband, I wanted to scream. She deserved the truth.
But would she even believe me?
And if she did, would she hate me for ruining her life? I wasn't sure I had the strength to take that risk.
But I also knew I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. I finally made my decision. I met Sarah at our usual coffee shop, my hands trembling. There's something you need to know, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I expected anger, denial, maybe even accusations. But she just sat there, silent, her eyes dark and unreadable.
When I finished, she exhaled shakily. I had a feeling, she admitted.
I just didn't want it to be true. My heart shattered for her.
She deserved better than this.
What happened next was out of my hands. Sarah confronted Ethan, and their marriage fell apart.
Lisa, she was furious at me for betraying her, but I didn't care.
A real friend wouldn't have put me in this position to begin with.
Ethan barely spoke to me after that, blaming me for exposing his secret. But the truth was, he had no one to blame but himself. I wasn't the one who cheated. I wasn't the one who lied.
I had just refused to be part of the cover-up.
Now, I live with the fallout. My family is fractured. My friendships are in ruins. But at least I can sleep at night.
The truth hurts, but so does living a lie. And if I had to do it all over again,
I wouldn't change a thing.
I found out that my father has another family in another city.
It started with a forgotten phone, buzzing on the kitchen counter while he was in the shower. I wasn't trying to snoop, but the message on the screen caught my eye. Miss you, Daddy. Can't wait to see you this weekend.
My heart stopped. The sender was a girl my age. Confused, I scrolled up, and what I saw made my stomach twist. Pictures of my father with another woman, another child.
A second life. For days, I pretended I didn't know. I watched him closely, looking for signs I had somehow missed all these years. The late business trips, the weekends away, the unexplained expenses, things my mother had always brushed off, suddenly made sense.
He had been lying to us.
But why?
And how long had he been doing this? The more I thought about it, the angrier I became.
He had built an entire family behind our backs, and none of us had ever suspected a thing.
I debated what to do.
Telling my mother would shatter her world. She loved him. She trusted him. And if I confronted my father, what would he say? Would he deny it? Try to justify it?
I didn't know if I could even look at him the same way again.
Every time he smiled at me, every time he hugged me, I wondered if he did the same with them. Did he love them more? Did he ever feel guilty? Or had he become so good at lying that it didn't even matter?
I finally worked up the courage to confront him.
One evening, after dinner, I sat across from him, my heart pounding.
Who is she? I asked, my voice trembling.
He didn't even pretend not to know what I was talking about. Instead, he let out a heavy sigh and ran a hand down his face. It's complicated, he muttered, but it wasn't. He had been living a double life, deceiving us for years. And now, I had to decide what to do with the truth. He begged me not to tell my mother.
It'll destroy her, he pleaded.
She doesn't need to know, but didn't she deserve the truth?
How could I keep something like this from her?
At the same time, if I exposed him, I would be tearing our family apart. My father was wrong, but did that mean I had the right to be the one to bring everything crashing down? The weight of the secret felt unbearable, pressing down on me like a stone. I tried to distance myself, but the knowledge poisoned everything. Family dinners felt like a farce. Every time my mother kissed my father goodnight, I had to fight the urge to scream. My father acted like nothing had changed, but for me, everything had.
He wasn't the man I thought he was.
He was a stranger, and yet he was still my father. How was I supposed to reconcile the man who raised me with the man who had lied to us all? In the end, I told my mother I couldn't carry the burden alone.
Her face went pale as I showed her the messages, the photos, the proof of his betrayal. She didn't cry. She just sat there, staring at the screen, her hands trembling. I knew something was wrong, she whispered. I just never wanted to believe it. That night, my father left the house, and my mother locked the door behind him. Our family was broken, but at least there were no more lies.
Now, I live with the aftermath. My father calls, but I rarely pick up.
He says he still loves us, but love isn't supposed to come with secrets.
My mother is trying to rebuild her life, and so am I. The truth destroyed our family, but in some ways, it set us free.
And even though I hate what he did, I'm relieved I no longer have to pretend.
The worst part of betrayal isn't the lie itself, it's the moment you realize the person you trusted was never who you thought they were.
My daughter cheated on her husband with my ex. The words felt unreal, like a twisted nightmare I couldn't wake up from.
When I first heard the rumor, I dismissed it as impossible. My ex-husband, Mark, had practically raised Lily. He had been in her life since she was 5. She called him her second dad.
The idea that she would betray her husband, let alone with him, was too much to comprehend. But then I saw the messages,
and suddenly, everything made sickening sense.
I confronted Lily first, praying that there was some explanation, some misunderstanding. But when I said Mark's name, her face went pale. Emma, I didn't mean for it to happen, she whispered.
My stomach turned.
She wasn't denying it. She wasn't even shocked that I knew.
How long?
I managed to ask, my voice barely steady. She hesitated.
A few months, she admitted.
Months. She had been sneaking around with my ex, lying to her husband, lying to me.
The betrayal felt unbearable. I had divorced Mark years ago, but that didn't mean I wanted him anywhere near my daughter like that. He had watched her grow up. He had been a part of our family. And now, he had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed.
I wanted to scream at her, to demand how she could do this to her husband, to me, to herself.
But the worst part,
she looked guilty, but not ashamed.
Like she had convinced herself this wasn't as horrifying as it was. Then came Mark. I had to hear it from him, had to see if he had even a shred of remorse. When I called him, his voice was cautious, like he already knew why I was calling. I'm sorry, he said immediately.
I didn't mean for this to happen. The same pathetic excuse Lily had given me.
You were a father figure to her. I spat, my hands shaking. How could you do this? He had no answer,
just silence.
And in that silence, I realized he wasn't sorry for what he had done, just that he got caught.
Lily begged me not to tell her husband.
We were going to stop, she promised, as if that erased what she had already done. But I couldn't keep this secret. Not for her, not for Mark.
Her husband, James, was a good man.
He didn't deserve to live in ignorance while they decided whether or not their affair was worth destroying his life.
When I told him, his face crumpled in devastation. And Lily, she didn't even try to defend herself. She just stood there, silent, as her marriage fell apart. After that, everything unraveled.
James packed his things and left.
My relationship with Lily became strained, almost non-existent. I couldn't look at her the same way anymore.
Mark tried to call, but I blocked his number.
He had destroyed enough lives, mine, Lily's, James's.
I wasn't going to give him another chance to explain the inexcusable. Some betrayals were too deep to forgive, and this was one of them. Months passed, but the wounds never fully healed.
Lily moved out of town, unable to face the shame of what she had done.
James eventually rebuilt his life, though I knew the scars of her betrayal would never fully fade. And me, I was left wondering where I went wrong.
Had I raised her poorly? Had I ignored the signs?
Or had she simply chosen the path that led to destruction all on her own?
I didn't know. Maybe I never would. One thing was certain, there was no going back. I had lost a daughter, not in the physical sense, but in a way that felt even more permanent. She had made her choice, and in doing so, she had broken something between us that could never be repaired. And no matter how much time passed, no matter how much I wished things could be different, I knew I would never see her the same way again.